This is NDTV, and you're watching Classics.
Good evening and welcome to the world this week. As Arabs and Israelis fight out their verbal battles, Imelda Marcos, once accused of looting her country, returns to a rousing reception. The new grand whiz kid of chess, Vishwanath Anand, talks to the world this week about his past and his hopes for the future. Selling like hotcakes to the young school kids in New York, pencils that look like hypodermic syringes. And in sports, world-class volleyball and a tragic death for a daredevil bungee jumper. But first Zambia, where Kenneth Kaunda, one of the best-known African leaders, lost hopelessly in the country's first elections in 27 years. The wave of democracy that's gradually moving across Africa hit Zambia last week and swept Frederick Chiluba into power. Chiluba promises to end Kaunda's version of socialism and bring in free market policies and privatization.
At one time, it had seemed that Zambian President Kenneth Kaunda would rule forever. He had won independence for his country, emerged as one of Africa's most celebrated statesmen, and had single-handedly ruled Zambia for 27 seemingly endless years. But last week, Kaunda was finally humbled as Zambia's 3 million voters gave a dramatic verdict against him. He polled just 20% of the votes, while the opposition candidate, Frederick Chiluba, of the Movement for Multi-Party Democracy, the MMD, got the rest. Chiluba promises to end the nepotism and corruption that characterized the later years of Kaunda's rule and introduce free market policies to revive the crisis-ridden economy. The poll result not only marks the end of Kaunda's supremacy, but also the end of a one-party democracy styled on socialistic lines. The transition to a multi-party system was remarkably peaceful. Poll turnout was extremely high, and by all accounts, the elections were conducted scrupulously. Western observers, including former US President Jimmy Carter, who oversaw the elections, were impressed. Shortly after his landslide victory, Chiluba was sworn in as Zambia's second president, and the first democratically elected one in more than 2 decades. Kaunda acknowledged his defeat with a grace befitting his stature as one of Africa's most respected leaders. He congratulated his successor and said losing was part of the electoral game.
This is the nature of multi-party politics. You win some and you lose some elections.
Chiluba too accepted his new status with humility.
You know, the whole thing is a new ball game to me, and I'm waiting for the experts to tell me, here's where you start now, and your elder brother Kaunda ends there, then I'll pick it up.
But picking up the pieces is not going to be easy. When Kaunda had assumed power 27 years ago, he had inherited an economy that was rich by African standards. But Chiluba claims that Kaunda's socialism, which included wholesale nationalization of industries and the imposition of agricultural collectives, ruined the economy. Last year, food riots broke out throughout the country, followed by mass looting. Although time was clearly running out for Kaunda, he appeared to be unconcerned as the economy slid deeper into debt and food prices rose sharply. Chiluba will now have to tackle a crippling $12 billion foreign debt, runaway inflation, and a broken-down agricultural system. But unlike Kaunda, Chiluba is unlikely to get anywhere near 27 years to keep his poll promises.
Although a wall of differences remain between the two sides, the Mideast peace talks went bilateral this week, putting an end to the dramatic slanging match between Israel and Syria in the first stage of the talks that ended last week. The talks are still bogged down in procedural matters, but the general view is that as long as the Arabs and Israelis are talking, there is some hope of a peaceful settlement emerging.
After last week's diplomatic histrionics at Madrid, the Arab and Israeli delegations met face to face to discuss serious business. But they did not come to the negotiating table without a little bit of arm twisting by the United States, who wanted the bilaterals to continue in Madrid.
It would be very difficult to understand how a party could now refuse to attend bilateral negotiations simply because of a disagreement over the site of those negotiations.
The American stakes in seeing the Middle East peace process begin are high, and the first person to recognize this is the PLO chief Yasser Arafat.
It is clear and obvious that we are looking at the new order now, which is the responsibility of the one superpower, the responsibility of Mr. President Bush and the American administration, and we have full confidence. We trust them as an honest broker, and we are sure that they will carry on in this peace process, that we can achieve real and just, comprehensive, lasting solution in the Middle East, in Palestine.
The Palestinians, who were part of the Jordanian delegation, were the most forceful in making their point of view. They were willing to discuss the first stage towards an independent Palestinian state, interim self-government in the occupied territories. But before that,
the settlements must stop now. Peace cannot be waged while Palestinian land is confiscated in myriad ways, and the status of the occupied territories is being decided each day by Israeli bulldozers and barbed wire. This is not simply a position. It is an irrefutable reality. Today, our people under occupation are holding high the olive branch of peace. In the words of Chairman Arafat in 1974 before the UN General Assembly, "Let not the olive branch of peace fall from my hands."
Indeed, all over the occupied territories, Palestinians came out into the streets to express solidarity with their representatives in Madrid. They offered olive branches to Israeli soldiers. Initially, some Israeli soldiers accepted the hand of peace and friendship gratefully, but soon the situation reverted to normal. The Israelis have now banned demonstrations, fearing the Palestinian peace offensive would increase Palestinian solidarity. In fact, the Israelis have continued with their settlement policy regardless of the talks at Madrid. On the very day the Israelis and Syrians were meeting in Madrid, the hardline housing minister, General Ariel Sharon, was inspecting a newly opened settlement in the Golan Heights.
Could you blame the Syrians for taking the view from Damascus that you're not really interested in peace? Because that's what they were saying all weekend, and yet here you are now inaugurating the settlement.
Do you know the Syrians? I don't know that if there is any other regime in the Middle East. It's worse than Assad is worse than Saddam Hussein.
The best thing which can be said about the Israeli-Syrian encounter in Madrid is that it happened at all. Syria wants the return of the Golan Heights occupied by Israel in 1967. But Israel refuses, demanding instead that talks be held at a location in the Middle East. The Arab nations do not want to hold talks in the Middle East, as they feel it would in effect recognize Israel and legitimize what they have always argued is its illegal occupation of the West Bank, Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip.
The Israeli delegation rejected all the necessary requirements to establish peace in the region. The Israeli head of delegation talked about everything except the land that the Israelis occupy and have been occupying for the last 24 years.
Real progress.
At the end of the bilaterals in Madrid, Secretary of State James Baker was asked whether there were any guarantees that the talks would continue.
There can't be any guarantees. This is the Middle East.
Imelda Marcos came home this week, bags, baggage and drama, after being exiled from the Philippines for 6 years. But she was not allowed to bring back with her the body of her husband, former President Ferdinand Marcos. The exuberant reception that Imelda received fueled speculation that she might enter politics to oppose President Cory Aquino. With the Philippines in the middle of a debt crisis, the nation waits for the War of the Widows to begin. It had all the elements of a political comeback. The champagne toasts on the flight.
We really enjoy being a part of history. We certainly enjoy being a part of taking you back home again.
Oh, thank you.
The mobs at the airport and the well-orchestrated media hype that ensured that the crowds lined the streets to welcome her. And of course, the star attraction herself, Imelda Marcos, veteran of the photo opportunity. After an impromptu press conference on her way to her hotel from the airport, she led her supporters in a Marcos campaign song. Few could have doubted that Imelda was staking her claim to the presidency in the elections next year. Imelda, however, said that she was only interested in helping the poor and that her primary aim in returning was to bring her husband's body back for a state burial. 2 days before her return, amid the exploding flashbulb, she visited the Honolulu cemetery where her husband's body lies. Sitting by the open casket, she bid him a tearful but public farewell. Unmoved by Imelda's emotional displays, the Philippine government, led by Corazon Aquino, won't permit the return of Marcos's body unless it's buried in his home province. In fact, the only reason that the government has allowed Mrs. Marcos to return is so that they can prosecute her on several charges, both criminal and civil. If she's convicted, she could be imprisoned and the government would retrieve $350 million said to have been looted by the Marcoses and deposited in a Swiss bank. But Mrs. Marcos was undaunted by the charges.
It's never prison to be in your home country.
And once back in Manila, she made a bid for public sympathy by describing herself as being penniless as a result of the government's action against her. Supporters almost immediately started a collection drive on the streets of Manila. But not everyone believed her story. Although she has no political base, Mrs. Marcos may benefit from the popular discontent with the Aquino government. Inflation is at 20%, interest rates are high and unemployment is growing. While it's unlikely that the Filipinos would have so soon forgotten the excesses of the Marcos regime, clearly Imelda hopes to evoke other images of the Marcos myth. President Aquino had earlier announced that she would not seek another term of office in the next elections. But it's now reported that she might reconsider her decision if Imelda Marcos throws her hat in the ring next May. The other major stories that hit the headlines this week include the question mark that hangs over the future shape of NATO and the thousands of lives lost in the terrible storm that hit the Philippines. This week, the 16 leaders of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization met to redefine their role in the post-Cold War world. The Allies decided to slash their nuclear arsenal in Europe by 80%. the biggest cut in the 42-year history of the alliance. NATO leaders also endorsed an earlier decision to create a special forum for East European nations, where they can discuss security concerns with the West. But the issue on everyone's mind was how much longer the United States will continue to be the key to European security now that the Soviet threat has disappeared. Ukraine's parliament voted to allow its prime minister to sign an economic treaty linking the republics of the Soviet Union. The Ukraine, the second largest republic, had abstained when 8 republics signed the treaty last month. After 13 years of hostile relations, China and Vietnam have normalized diplomatic ties. The Sino-Vietnamese breach was caused by Hanoi's rule in Cambodia since 1978 and the ouster of the Chinese-supported Khmer Rouge. The signing of the Cambodian peace treaty removed the key obstacle to normalized relations. Tropical storm Thelma triggered floods and landslides across the central Philippines, and officials estimated the death toll to be much higher than the 3,000 people confirmed killed. Most of the deaths occurred in Imelda Marcos's home province of Leyte, about 350 miles southeast of Manila. An additional 3,500 people were reported missing and feared dead. Officials said their bodies may never be found because they were swept out to sea or buried under tons of debris. American President George Bush cancelled a tour of Asia scheduled for later this month due to pressing domestic concerns. Bush suffered an electoral setback this week when his former Attorney General lost a crucial Senate election, causing the president to worry about his own election prospects in 1992. Bush has been called the anywhere but America president by Democrats critical of his emphasis on foreign rather than domestic issues. Controversial British publisher Robert Maxwell died this week in a mysterious sailing accident during a voyage to the Canary Islands in his $20 million yacht. The billionaire businessman, a publisher of tabloid newspapers in the UK and the United States, had been suing a prominent American journalist, Seymour Hersh, for alleging that Maxwell had ties to Israel's Mossad spy agency. Over the last 2 weeks, Vishwanathan Anand did India proud by taking on the top 10 chess players in the world and eventually coming third. During the tournament, he defeated the world champion Garry Kasparov as well as the former world champion Anatoly Karpov. By all standards, it was a remarkable performance. Jennifer Arul in Madras and Kanta Talukdar in the Netherlands sent us this report on India's world champion in the making. This year's Interpolis chess tournament in Tilburg, Netherlands, which ended this week, was rated as one of the strongest contests ever. All the greats were there, world champion Garry Kasparov and his closest rival and sworn enemy, the Russian Grandmaster Anatoly Karpov. Other big names in the world of chess like Gata Kamsky and Viktor Korchnoi were among the heavyweight lineup in the 2-week competition.
Mr. Sosanka, why do you rate this as the strongest tournament in the chess world today?
Well, it is the strongest tournament not because of the fact that the world champion himself is playing in this tournament, but also the strongest grandmasters of the world from all of the world are playing in this tournament. And the ratings of the players, of the grandmasters, are the highest. That's why it makes this tournament the strongest.
Competing with all these great names in chess was India's 21-year-old Vishwanathan Anand, the only Asian ever to have played in this championship. And from all accounts, Anand gave everyone a tough time.
I think he's extremely talented and he understands chess very well, as a unusual, unique vision of the chessboard. And he plays very fast, which is important because he can press his opponents in the time trouble.
In fact, Anand went on to win against both Karpov and Kasparov, but because the tournament was based on a league rather than a knockout system, he came third in the tournament. His game showed a dramatic improvement, and he is now acknowledged as a major force in world chess.
You have been playing with Vishwanathan Anand. How would you rate him?
So I must say that he played very well match with me, and I didn't expect him playing so strong because I analyzed his games in tournaments he played before match with me, and so I think he played 2 levels higher, and I was surprised. I think he has great talent.
Anand's unusual speed is an important asset as it can intimidate his opponents. But it can also be a weakness as it sometimes leads to careless mistakes.
He is a very quick player, but he must learn how to use time just to avoid simple mistakes which he still makes in different kind of positions. He is too quick.
People have been saying that your strength is also your weakness, your speed. What would you say to that?
Well, I'm getting old now. I'm playing a bit slower these days. And in my youth, I used to play games and finish games in 20 and 25 minutes. But nowadays, I usually take about 2 hours a game, especially. But it's also a question of where you're playing. I mean, in a tournament at this level, you have to be that much more careful at this level. And you can't play quickly and superficially as I used to do. So I've slowed down a bit, but I'm still relatively quite fast compared to the other players.
The tension of international chess tournaments requires a high level of concentration and the players must be physically fit. Grandmasters use different ways of relaxing between games in order to stay mentally fresh.
How do you relax after a game?
Well, it depends on where you are also. I mean, in a place like this, obviously, I'm just in the recreation room. But this could also be watching TV or just going for a walk or whatever. This also depends on the weather, for instance. Well, anything that sort of takes your mind off chess.
Do you do any exercises for mental concentration?
Well, sometimes I do a little yoga, but well, it's only about 20 minutes.
Keeping fit is particularly difficult when you are virtually living out of a suitcase. Anand spends about 6 months a year in India and 6 months at tournaments abroad. Home for him is in Madras, where his parents live and where he went to school and college.
As a student, he was above average. In the 12th standard, often he was away from class. Yet, he did very well in the public examination. As a boy, he was affable, friendly with every boy in the school, always helpful. But most important in him is he is unassuming. Even now, I find him unassuming.
At 21, Anand already has under his belt the Arjuna Award and the Padma Shri. But his chess playing days started over 15 years ago.
I would say that he did show an inherent capacity to understand chess at a very young age. Since my wife used to play with her father in her younger days and plays a good game of chess, she was able to guide him in the early stages, teaching him the fundamentals so that he can take off. And chess became his a favorite game in the early age.
So you actually played with him when he was a very little boy. How old was he?
He was around 6.
You taught him his first lessons at that
First
age?
moves, yeah.
Does he play chess when he's at home here?
Yes, you know, that is one of his greatest assets. You know, chess is a part of his life. And when he gets a chess magazine in post, he forgets everything else till he goes through the whole thing. And I always wish that the magazine doesn't come when he's having his food. And that is probably one of the reasons for his success. That is total dedication to chess.
And for Anand, the long hours of reading and analysis are crucial in his strategy against the world's greatest. But his game is still spontaneous. And most important, he retains the ability to enjoy chess.
Do you normally have a general overall strategy, or is this worked out game by game?
A bit of both, actually. And well, it also depends on how you're doing in the tournament and so on. I mean, if you have had a strategy to take first place and you lose your first 4 games, then obviously you have to do some rethinking during the tournament. I mean, you have some idea what you want to do and then see how it goes.
What advice would you give chess players back home?
Well, what can I say? I think they should just enjoy the game. This is all I can say. I mean, I can't really give advice at this point. You know, they should just enjoy the game, and this is important.
Anand has hit the world's chess stage, and in many ways he has been the focus of the media in this tournament. But many believe that this is only the beginning, and that if he continues to make the right moves, he has the makings of a world champion.
What does it take to become a world champion?
It takes time, efforts, and it takes actually your life that should be devoted to fight for the title, because you don't have much time to spend for something else. I think he has a very good future if he works very hard on chess.
The Interpol's 1991 championships, with an average ELO rating of 2,666, is of the highest standards the chess world has ever seen. Vishwanathan Anand is the first Asian to be invited to participate in this prestigious tournament. With his skillful maneuvering, Anand has managed to leave his mark in a championship previously predicted to be dominated by the 4 Ks, Kasparov, Karpov, Korchnoi and Kamsky. This is Kanta Talukdar for the World This Week at the Interpol's tournament in Tilburg.
And from chess we move on to other international sports this week, in which we start with the dangers associated with bungee jumping.
The latest variation of bungee jumping, leaping from a hot air balloon, has claimed its first victim. Bungee jumping began several years ago in New Zealand. Daredevils challenging their nerves in spectacular leaps from suspension bridges, with a springy rubber cable keeping them from crashing into the river below. Hal Mark Irish, a bungee jumping instructor in California, had completed the hot air balloon jump successfully a dozen times before his fateful leap this week, captured in its full horror by an amateur cameraman. Irish fell more than 20 meters to his death when his cord got detached during a demonstration in Perris Valley, Southern California. A spokesman for the American Bungee Association said that Irish did not have a permit to jump and had ignored the association's safety guidelines. It was an accident, he said, which should not have happened. This weekend was a busy one for the world's leading women distance runners. While Scotland's Liz McColgan was making a winning marathon debut in New York, Elana Meyer of South Africa was adding further honours in Cape Town to an already impressive career. Though the sporting boycott of South Africa has so far prevented Meyer from competing outside her homeland, she is going to be a world title contender in the near future. The 24-year-old ran the fastest ever 15 kilometers run by a woman, beating the previous best of Norway's Ingrid Christensen by 20 seconds. Conditions were ideal as Meyer achieved her target of becoming the first woman to go under 47 minutes for the distance. Though much media attention has centered on Zola Budd, Meyer has firmly taken the #1 position in South African athletics. If South Africa takes part in its first Olympics since Rome in 1960, she would be one of the favourites for the 10,000 meters in Barcelona next year. In the latest round of the NASCAR competition, fortune favoured those who could endure the longest at the Phoenix International Raceway on Sunday. There were problems for Bobby Hamilton as he spun out of the race on just the second turn. Jeff Bodine seemed to have things under control as he took an early lead, having time in hand for a pit stop. But it wasn't a simple matter for Dale Earnhardt, who spent more time in the pits undergoing repairs than out on the track. And then there was trouble at turn number 2 as Bodine and 4 others formed a procession of dropouts.
Larry Pearson got into Richard. Herschel McGriff is in it for his 13th career.
It was Davey Allison in his Ford Thunderbird who withstood the test, taking his 5th victory of the year. The Basilica of Sacré-Cœur in Paris was a silent observer to a rather unusual event this week. Motocross champions displaying their skills on a Parisian street. Some of the world's best riders were on hand, including Italy's Diego Bosis, who stands 3rd in this year's World Championships. Spain's number 2, Amos Bilbao, negotiated the difficult jump section successfully. Ireland's Robert Crawford, 12th in the World Championships, was to take second place here. The last jump section proved to be the graveyard of many a rider. Bosis was the first victim. Crawford's fall cost him first place. Holland's Marco Wright also found the jump section too difficult. And for France's Christophe Fabre, it was just too much. The winner, Spain's Amos Bilbao. And no doubt, the riders and their bikes will be happy to return to the muddy tracks of more normal motocross. A deafening hometown crowd, two exceptionally talented teams, and the world's greatest player, all combined to provide a memorable conclusion to the World Club Indoor Volleyball Championships at Sao Paulo, Brazil last Sunday. Reigning world champions Il Mensaghero of Italy in white were in the final to defend their crown against Brazilian champions Banespa in red. Mensaghero, led by American Karch Kirali, reputedly the best player in the world, took the first set 15-7, but Banespa fought back to take the second 15-11. And that's when Kirali came alive, demonstrating his devastating spiking ability. Banespa, spurred on by the support of 25,000 partisan fans, fought hard, but the Italians took the third set 15-9. The Mensaghero players, pushed to the limit by Kirali, played like men possessed. In the fourth set, Mensaghero was serving for the match at 14-13. After one of the most magnificent rallies of the tournament, Mensaghero took their second straight world title. It was a memorable victory.
Three Hollywood superstars made the news this week with the launch of a new restaurant. A movie on the three-day Soviet coup that shook the world. But first, the pencil for school children that's causing an outcry among parents.
A pencil that looks like a syringe is provoking an outcry in New York City. Officials say the pencils, which are the latest fad amongst high school children, encourage drug abuse. The pencil looks like the needle of a hypodermic syringe and contains red ink which looks like blood. Officials say the syringe pencils are being sold in the poorer sections of the city.
This is no joke, this is no toy. This is an instrument to injure and kill our kids, and it ought to be absolutely roundly objected to.
I think it's very wrong, and they should just take those out the market, period. No questions about it.
Not all the children are impressed by the pencils.
I wouldn't buy one, because that's not interesting. It's not interesting.
Meanwhile, officials have urged teachers, parents and students to throw the pencils where they belong, in the trash. The tanks have returned to Moscow less than 2 months after the abortive coup against Mikhail Gorbachev. But the only shooting being done is with film cameras on the set of a new movie called 3 Days in August. Tanks and troops took up the positions they had occupied around the Russian parliament during the August coup.
When the second camera down there, when the first tank is out of on the line,
the $14 million movie, directed by Danish director Jan Jung, will recreate the tumultuous events that had the world glued to their TV screens. When filming first began, residents of Moscow were the last to know that it was only make-believe. 4,000 extras have been hired to recreate the scenes of resistance outside the Russian parliament. This is the actor playing Boris Yeltsin, a lookalike who will have to do until the director can persuade Yeltsin to play himself. Yeltsin, who led the opposition to the coup, is already a star in this woman's eyes. While he's not saying whether he'd accept the part, he's obviously got his autograph well rehearsed. It promises not to be a run-of-the-mill eatery. Called Planet Hollywood, the $17 million restaurant in New York houses a treasure trove of movie memorabilia. What's more, it is owned by 3 of Hollywood's biggest box office stars, Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Bruce Willis. When it opened to the public last week, the stars were shining brightly in Planet Hollywood. Obviously, it was their place to be.
Arriving now, Mr. Elton John, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get him up quickly. Elton. Eddie Murphy.
It's better organized than my premiere, I'll tell you that. Or any of mine.
Are you expecting to have a good time tonight?
Yeah, I will.
I think you might want to donate something to the Planet Hollywood?
Like I said, I haven't been asked, you know, so everything's open to negotiation.
Oh, my kids wanted to come, some of them, check it out.
And now you're a restaurateur.
Yes, that's right. I am finally master of my own kitchen. I like that. Finally. Turned out pretty well so far, wouldn't you say?
How does it feel to be a restaurateur?
It hasn't really hit me yet, you know. I'm a little shocked by it all still.
And the Wiener Schnitzel I cooked yesterday, I was here in the morning already cooking Wiener Schnitzel, and I of course was on the phone several times with my mother because some Wiener Schnitzel didn't turn out as well as I thought they should, and not as well as my mother makes it. So I called her right away from here, woke up because they're 9 hours ahead. I said, this is falling apart. I said, what should I do? She says, you use too much egg, you idiot. And so I went back and started remaking it.
We're going to wreck this joint. We came to wreck this joint.
We heard you're going to sing. Is that true?
Get the hell out of here.
Just when New York, just when you think you've seen everything, this will be something new and it'll be great.
The superstars, who say they have adopted a hands-on approach, are confident they are onto a winner.
And that's all for tonight in the world this week. Do join us again next Friday. Till then, from all of us here, good night.